activity-based costing systems. What we're going to talk about now is ABC, and you'll recall that stands for activity-based costing. That's where we're going to take our costs and we're going to chunk them instead of by what we spend it on, in other words, materials, labor, overhead, supplies, insurance, rent. That tells you what you spent your money on. Now, instead, we're going to take overhead, direct labor, selling and administrative and general expenses, and chunk it by the tasks or activities performed. In other words, why did you spend the money? I may have spent the money on travel, and that's the function or the cost, but when I look at ABC, instead I would say I spent the money on such and so a client to develop their service or something like that. That is not a good example. Let me think of another one. I spent the cost to receive inquiries, or I spent the cost to enter claims into a system. Do you see how this is like our to-do list? So you spent the cost to do something, the activity or the task, versus what did you spend the money on, supplies, insurance, etc. So hopefully that's a little clearer. When we use activity-based costing, our income statements look very, very different. And if you look in your book at exercise 1, you'll see this difference. In exercise 1, it shows us that two income statements. One, it lists supplies, salaries, travel, use and occupancy costs. And you're saying, well, what kind of income statement would do that? Well, a traditional income statement would do that. One that we used in the first 4 chapters, wasn't it? So that's the traditional cost world way of chunking costs. The second option in exercise 1 says we have our costs, same amount of costs, but here they're chunked by analyze claims, suspend claims. So you get the idea, this is an insurance company, don't you? And they're analyzing their claims, they're suspending their claims, they're receiving inquiries, they're resolving problems. So it's their to-do list and how much did they spend on each of these items. As a manager, would that be a whole lot easier to manage because you would know what you're spending your costs on and if you're getting any benefits from those activities. Now, in ABC, when we look at our activities, there's a cost hierarchy. Because we've got so many activities all over the place, we want to classify them or categorize them so they're easier to manage. And we find that activities are triggered at certain points. So in this cost hierarchy, the lowest trigger is the unit level. In other words, if you produce a unit, this cost happens. Typical unit level costs are things like direct materials and direct labor. If I make a product, labor and material costs happen, don't they, on a unit by unit basis. A batch level is like when you're making a batch of cookies. You don't turn on the oven for a single cookie and cook a single cookie. What do you cook? A batch of cookies. So that oven would be a batch level activity. Setting up to make cookies would be a batch level activity. You don't set up, you don't get out the mixing bowl every time you do a cookie, but it's for the batch of cookies. Product level primarily has to do with the design of the product or the advertising campaign of the product. So if I'm doing Chips Ahoy Chunky Chewy Cookies, that is a product level because that recipe differs from the original Chips Ahoy recipe, doesn't it? The packaging might differ. The advertising will differ. So that would be a product level cost because it's triggered for that concept or type of product. Facility level is a fixed cost. No matter how many units you produce and sell, no matter how many batches you produce, no matter how many products you produce, facilities are fixed amounts. So that's like insurance, rent, the supervisor's salary. So they're fixed for the production facility. So that's the difference. Now, what do you do with all of these costs? Well, you report them on your bill of activities, which looks just like a job order cost card, except instead of having materials, labor, and overhead as your categories, you have unit, batch, product, and facility. So for any product line or any job or anything that you're doing, you will now have a bill of activities to accumulate the costs that are associated with it.